Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Es freut mich sehr, Sie alle hier zu sehen. Aber ich sehe niemand, der Deutsch noch versteht. So I better switch to English or Pastor Maisgar will have my head on a platter like St. John the Baptist himself. It occurred to me that you might be interested in knowing what it was like in the church, the Lutheran church, 300 years ago in this area. And I guess the best way I can describe that is to say it was one step above chaos. And the main reason it was one step above chaos was that there were three types of clergy that kept things stirred up. The first and most numerous type of clergy were called the jacklegs. They weren't clergy at all. They were simply men who knew how to read. And they got away with doing what they did because so many of our people were illiterate. They couldn't read or write. They came here as indentured servants, and they knew nothing about the literary educated world. They were intelligent people. They could build anything. They could farm and raise food from poor ground. They were hard workers, but they had had no education in Europe. They were born to be farmers, and they stayed farmers, and that was it in Europe. They came here in the hopes of improving their condition. There were other German-speaking people that came to this area for religious purposes, freedom to believe what they wanted to believe and worship the way they wanted to worship. But most of our people came for economic improvement. The jacklegs were in it for one reason. You think to yourself, why on earth would anybody want to imitate a clergyman? For the money! Now, of course, today that's not the case. But in times when money was scarce of any sort, in any occupation, they knew that they could make a penny or two in the church. So they were able to read. They could read the service, just as the gentleman that was the lector today did such a fine job in reading the lessons. They could read well too, because many of them were schoolmasters. But they knew nothing about theology, and they caused a lot of trouble when they started to preach nonsense. So here's how they made their money. They charged for everything. You wanted to have a child baptized, you paid for it. You wanted Holy Communion that we will receive today. You brought your money with you to the altar before you could take the consecrated bread and wine. Things have improved quite a bit. I had to fight that situation when I got here. And the way I fought them was I forbid anybody to pay the stole fees. And when they couldn't get money anymore out of our people, they just left. Then there was a second type of clergy. They were real clergy, but they were clergy that had somehow or other fallen or failed in Europe. And they came here hoping to have a better chance at being good pastors. Some of them were frail in health. Some of them had moral lapses. They came to the colonies where nobody knew about their past, and they tried their best. When I arrived on the scene, and I knew some of them, they moved farther west. Voluntarily, they tried to get away from me because I knew practically all of them, and they just moved on west where nobody knew them. And then, of course, there was Count Zinzendorf. He was a nobleman, a count. He came from Central Europe. He was a valid clergyman. He had theological training. But his big mistake was trying to pass himself off as a member of the Lutheran hierarchy in this area. And when he learned of my presence, he summoned me to an audience with him and demanded I accept him as his, quote, superintendent. I said, the Hall of Fathers that issued the call for me to come to Pennsylvania to serve 3 congregations, one in Philadelphia, St. Michael's, one in Trapp called the Providence Church, and one in New Hanover, still called the New Hanover Lutheran Church, mentioned nothing about a superintendent. I had never heard of I didn't know what a superintendent was. So I said, no, I will not accept your leadership as a superintendent. Now, the reason he wanted to be recognized as a superintendent was because some of his people had been convinced that he was a genuine Lutheran clergyman, and they followed him. And they owned a building and tried to take possession of the building in the name of Zinzendorf's followers, when the building belonged to us. So we had to go to a civil magistrate to get that straightened out. And the magistrate said Zinzendorf had to turn over the keys to that building and the church records to me. And he left with his followers and went up to Bethlehem, and we had no more trouble from him. Now, we owned property in Philadelphia. We owned enough land that we could establish a cemetery there and build a church. That was St. Michael's congregation. And in Providence, in Trapp, we also owned land. The people there were very eager to build a church because at that time, 1742, 1743, they were worshiping in a barn. Now, in that barn, there were 4 languages that were spoken: German, horse, pig, and cow. And everybody understood each other. Everybody got along. Everything was fine, except the people weren't satisfied with worshiping in a barn. They wanted to worship in a church like this, where they could surround themselves with beautiful Christian symbolism and have the adornments of the church teach them about the history of salvation. That's what they wanted. That's what they were used to in Europe, and here they were still in a barn. So, as I was walking around their territory there, I saw a big pile of rocks. I said, what is that big pile of rocks there for? They said, Pastor, they are the building materials for the church that we want to build now that you're here. We know that you know how to work with an architect and build a church the way it should be built. And we know that you will lead the financial campaign to raise the money to pay for it. Now that might intimidate some pastors, but I was very happy to hear that, because that showed that the people had a will to improve themselves, their conditions, and their worship environment. I thought that was wonderful. I said, we will do this, but we have to be careful, because I'm going to end up running 3 building programs at the same time. This is not an easy task. Okay, I went up to New Hanover. And when I got up there, they had a church already. But it was a ramshackle affair, a couple of boards that had been nailed together, a ramshackle roof that leaked, and it was something that had to be replaced, obviously. And the people said, now don't get scared, Pastor, we don't want to keep this church. We know it's not satisfactory. We are ready, now that you are here, to build a new church. But I looked around and I saw no schoolhouse. I said, building a church can wait. It's more important to build a schoolhouse so that we can educate our children now that we have the chance to do so in this new territory. And they all liked that. They were all happy with that suggestion. So, we got the church built in Philadelphia, we got the church built in Trapp, we got the church built and the schoolhouse built in New Hanover, we got constitutions written. There had been no constitutions up to that point, because in Europe you didn't have a constitution in the church. The state told you what to do. The authorities, they took care of all of that for you. But then you had to do what they said, too. You had no freedom to make your own decisions in your own locations. I want to tell you about Trapp in particular. Augustus Church was named for Augustus Franke, who was the CEO, I'm going to call him, of the Halle Institute that prepared missionaries for foreign service in Germany. So they liked that. They knew that I had come from the Halle school, and they wanted to honor this man for all the good work that he had done. That's why it's called Augustus Church. The church was built, and it was different from the other two, one in St. Michael's and the one in New Hanover, because Providence, Trapp, was a bilingual community. English and German speakers lived together there. Up in New Hanover, there were a whole bunch of German speakers, and down in Philadelphia, there were a whole bunch of German speakers. We didn't need to contend with English, but in Trapp, we did. And it happened spontaneously without my naming any special plans on how to do this. We started out with German speakers. We didn't have to worry about cow, pig, and horse anymore because we were in a church, so we didn't need to bother with that. One day, after the service, I was greeting the people at the door, and all of a sudden I realized that there were 2 or 3 English speakers that had come to our service. And I said, oh, it's nice to see you today, but I am curious, I have a question I must ask you. Why would you come to a church where you didn't understand any of the language that was being spoken? Can you tell me that, please? They said, well, the reason is simple. The Perkiomen River Creek was too high to cross today. There had been a lot of rain and the river was up, and at that time there was no bridge across the Perkiomen. And they said we couldn't get across the river. We wanted to go to church, so we decided that we would come to your church even though we knew that we wouldn't understand very much of what was going on. I said, that is a good explanation. I have no problem with that. You'll come to church as often as you want. Whenever the river is high and you can't get across to Evansburg and go to St. James English-speaking church, then you come here. That would be fine. But then, one day, the river was low, and you could get across. And still, some of the English speakers had come to our service. What's going on here? So at the door again, I came to them, and they came up to me, and they said, good morning. I said, good morning. I have a question to ask you. Now the river is low. Now you can get across to go to your own church, the English-speaking church, but you've come to us instead. I'm curious. I'm not being critical. I'm curious. Why did you do that? They said, we like the singing. We like to hear the music. I said, that's good enough reason. You come whenever you want. You are welcome here, whether you speak English or not. Okay? One English speaker came up to me several weeks later. He said to me, Pastor, I hope you don't feel that I'm being presumptuous here, but you know, we English-speaking people, we like to sing too. Would it be possible to include once in a while an English song so that we could sing as well? I said, that's a good idea. I don't know why I didn't think of that on my own. Yes, we can do this. We will include some English songs so that you can sing. Okay. You know how English speakers are. You give a finger, they take a hand. So, a couple weeks later, again, an English speaker came to me and he said, you know, Pastor, we English speakers love the Word of God too. Would it be possible to include in the service from time to time an English message? I said, that's a terrific idea. Absolutely, we can do this. We will do this. And that's how I ended up having 2 services at Augustus Church, German in the morning and English in the afternoon. But it was the 3rd request that particularly impressed me, and this came from one of the German speakers. He came up to me and he said, Herr Pastor, would it be possible for us to include English in the curriculum of the parish school? We want our children to be able to speak English better than we do. We just get along with it. We don't speak it correctly, but we just, with a lot of hand motions and whatnot, make our wants and desires known. We want our children to speak English properly so that they will be able to advance in the greater society of the town. Would that be possible? I said yes, absolutely. That would be a good thing. So we put English into the curriculum of the parish school. And we did that in all 3 churches. And that way, we helped to equip our young people to rise in society in ways that would never have been possible if they didn't speak English properly. Now, I'm going to tell you more about all of these things when we have the program after the luncheon. But I'm not going to say too much now because I don't want to put you asleep and scare you away. I want you to hear the second part of what I have to say. So I'm going to conclude now in the following manner. It dawned on me that while we're here in Pennsylvania with new opportunities, we have to take advantage of these things. We have to be sensitive to the changes that are taking place in society. And the church must change along with the society and help play a role in making sure that the changes go in the right direction. We tried to do that all the way back in the 18th century. But that is a need that continues to this day. The church must change with the society and try to help guide it in the proper direction. And I'll have more to say about that this afternoon. I'm going to conclude now. Before I slip back into character, let me tell you how much I enjoyed the service this morning. It was wonderful. And the highest praise that I can give Pastor Meiskeier is this. That's exactly how I do it. It was wonderful, wonderful, inspiring service. The singing was great. The music was wonderful. The distribution of the Blessed Sacrament was wonderful, too. Everything was done in proper order. Now I'm going to, enough complimenting, I don't want her to get a swelled head. I'm slipping back now into character. I want to tell you what I'm going to talk about right now so that if I go overboard, somebody can say, now wait a minute, you're going past where you said you were going to go. I have to save something for part 3. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Europe and about the trip across the Atlantic and what I found when I got in Charleston, and I'm going to stop on my arrival in Philadelphia. And then we'll all eat, and then I'll tell you the last part of the presentation will be from Philadelphia, life in southeastern Pennsylvania, and what I had to contend with when I got there. So, all right. I had the very great fortune to be able to attend the University of Göttingen, which to this day is a famous institution in Germany, and there I studied theology and science. And from there I went to the preparatory school in Halle, which I mentioned in the church. That was the place where missionaries for the foreign mission field all over the world were prepared, and they would teach you basic things that you wouldn't think a missionary would need to know. Some basics in medicine, for example. I learned all of those things, how to organize a congregation, how to write a constitution, and then some of the basic medical needs that I might confront, because I had taken it into my head that I wanted to go as a missionary to India. But one day when I was walking across the campus in Halle, a messenger came to me and said, Dr. Franke would like to speak to you in his office. And you know, when the CEO at the top sends for you, you begin to wonder, what did I do? Oh, and I was a little bit uneasy when I went to his office, because I thought I was going to be disciplined for some reason or other. And when I walked through the door, he hit me right away with it. He said, Muhlenberg, we have a problem. I thought, oh boy, what do we have now? Maybe you can help us. We have 3 congregations in Pennsylvania that have been petitioning us for a pastor for 3 years, and we have not been able to find anybody that is willing to go there. Now we know that you have your heart set on going to India, but we feel the need in Pennsylvania is greater because the congregations are already somewhat organized. They have a German group meeting here and here and here, and we feel that if we put them off any longer, we will be beginning to see them collapse. And they will go to other churches, God forbid the Presbyterians or the Methodists or something like that, or the Mennonites. Or they'll just fade away and go nowhere at all. We need to get a pastor there as quickly as possible, and we think you might be the man for the job. Would you be willing to consider this? You would have to learn English in either case. English to go to India, English to go to Pennsylvania, British territory. I said, how much time do I have to think about? Oh, take all the time that you want to pray and consider, but let me know by tomorrow what you want to do. So, I spent a lot of time on my knees that night praying to God to show me the way to go. I decided to accept the challenge. I told Dr. Franke that the next day. He said to me, that's wonderful. We will send you to London, and there we will put you under the care of Ziegenhagen, the royal chaplain, because King George III was a German. He was a German speaker, and he had a Lutheran chaplain. So the court preacher's name was Ziegenhagen. And he knew all about me. They had shared that information with him ahead of time, that they were going to contact me and see if they could persuade me to go to Pennsylvania, which was a British territory under the governorship of the Penn family. So I went to London. And there I was given an English tutor. I was good at languages. And I began to practice my English, and the next thing I knew, I was on board a ship headed for North America. That journey was one of the worst experiences in my life. the constant rocking of the ship, and then in storms up and down and up and down. I was seasick half the time. The sailors swore like demons straight from hell. And I went up to them and I admonished them in my primitive English. And they just laughed at me. They were already destined to go to hell and stay there for all eternity as far as I was concerned. I said, there are women and children on board this ship. You shouldn't talk like that in front of women and children. But they ignored me. The women and children and the men that accompanied them were primarily Lutheran refugees from the city of Salzburg in Austria. Now, at that time in Europe, they had settled a long period of religious warfare between Protestants and Catholics in an imperfect manner, but it was better than everybody trying to kill each other all the time. Europe was prostrate with weakness from religious warfare, at least the German-speaking areas. So the compromise they came up with was this. Whatever the ruler's religion was of that area, that was to be the religion of the people. If you were another religion, then you had two choices. You could convert to the religion of the ruler, or you could leave and head for a territory where the ruler was your religion. Now, there were only three religions that were recognized as legal: Lutheran, Reformed, and Catholic. If you were a Mennonite or any kind of Baptist, you weren't welcome anywhere. And you were evicted constantly wherever it was that you went. The Penn family knew this. They were not dumb. And they wanted to populate Pennsylvania with white people. And they knew that there were plenty of white people in Central Europe that were being displaced. And they sent agents into that area called Neuländer, new land people, to recruit people to go. And though they painted a rosy picture how wonderful Pennsylvania was, and everybody should go there. Well, life in Pennsylvania was very hard, and the clergy knew this, and that's why there was very few of them that volunteered to go there. They wanted to stay in Europe where it was comfortable. They didn't want to have to live on a frontier and deal with Indians and so on. So, this was the situation that I found myself in. Here I am on board a ship sailing towards North America, and the only people that I felt comfortable with were the Lutheran refugees called Salzburger. Salzburger. They took their name from the town where they had been rejected and said, you have to get out. These people decided they didn't want to convert to Catholicism. They were going to leave. And they were headed for a southern area, Georgia, a town called Ebenezer, and the name of the Lutheran church there was Hebron Church. Hebron Church. So we had daily devotions together on board, and I taught the children some Bible stories. I couldn't teach confirmation because I didn't have copies of the catechism with me. That was packed away in my luggage. And just from day to day, we tried to make it through. The food was terrible. The water was putrid. Sometimes the water was so bad, we had to make coffee out of it to get it down and keep it down. Now, I'll taste this and see if this was made with good water. Excellent. No problem here. All right. But when you're dependent completely on the wind, that makes a journey very difficult. We ran out of water. We would have been glad to have putrid water at one point. What do you do when you run out of putrid water and there's no water at all? You spread out blankets on the decks and you pray for rain. And then when it rains, you wring the blankets out into buckets and you drink that. But we even ran out of that. when we're just about there and you can see North America, the coast of Carolina, off in the distance, and the wind is contrary. It's blowing you away from the coast instead of blowing you in, and you have no water. Now what do you do? Off in the distance, our captain saw a British man of war patrolling the coast, and his job was to keep Spanish raiders that were sailing off the coast of Florida, because Florida was Spanish territory at that time, from raiding the coast of Carolina. And we were immediately challenged. Now, our captain was not as dumb as he looked. He refused to declare that our ship was a British ship by raising the proper flag signal. He did not respond. And right away, that man of war headed towards us. And when it got within firing distance, we were challenged again. And this time, we ran up the British flag, and they knew that we were British, but we were in for a lecture. The captain of the British man of war was quite annoyed with our captain for not declaring earlier that we were a British ship. And then they used these bullhorns, you know, and they broadcast to the British man of war that we had run out of water, that we were at the point where certain people were going to die soon if we didn't get water immediately. All the lectures stopped. They sent barrels of water from their ship to our ship. People got a drink, the wind changed, and in we sail to the port of Charleston, where we disembarked. I got off the ship, and for the first time in my life, I saw a black man. I had never seen a black man before. All the blacks there were slaves. I had never been exposed to the institution of slavery before. I felt sorry for these people, and I thought, well, at least I can preach the gospel to them and give them hope for the future. No, that was against the local laws. You were not allowed to preach the gospel to black people, because if you preached the gospel to them, they might be so inspired that they would think that they're as good as white people. And if you tried to preach the gospel to the black slaves and let them think that they're as good as white people, they might rise up and kill everybody. I thought, oh my goodness, how ridiculous is this? But if you did preach to the black people, you were put in jail. So I thought to myself, you know, I can't deal with this. I can't stay here very long. I have to get out of here as quickly as possible and get to another place where these restrictive laws are not in existence. So here I am in Carolina when I really need to be up in Philadelphia. Now, I knew the boat was going to go to Carolina. That's where the Salzburgers were going. So I had to somehow or other get up to Philadelphia, and I went and talked with one of the German speakers that I heard on the street, and I said, how does one do this? How does one get up to Philadelphia where I need to be? He said, Herr Pastor, you must take a sloop now and ride up the coast. And the sloop was a little ship, and you will be able to reach Philadelphia in about a 3-week period. But this is the fall, and the last sloop is running a couple of days from now. If you don't want to spend 3 months here in Charleston when the sloops do not run, then you must embark on one of these ships right away. So I managed to make reservations and get my passage all taken care of and my luggage transferred to a little sloop. The last one that was leaving Charleston headed for Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the biggest city in North America at that time. So, got on board, and if I thought the journey across the Atlantic was bad, oh, this was a sheer experience of hell. Up and down and up and down, and water splashing over the sides, seasick all the time. It's a wonder that I survived. The good thing about that trip was, and the only good thing that I can remember, is that instead of 3 months, which the trip across the Atlantic took, this trip from Charleston to Philadelphia only took 3 weeks. And finally, we were coming up the Delaware Bay. And the city of Philadelphia looked to me like the New Jerusalem. It was such a beautiful sight to see Philadelphia. I got off the ship and I did what I always do. I listened for German to be spoken on the streets. And I went up to the first German speaker that I heard, and I said, I am Pastor Muhlenberg. Can you put me in touch with one of the deacons or any of the leadership at St. Michael's Lutheran Church? Yes, Herr Pastor, we have been waiting for you. We knew you were coming. Wonderful to see you. They put me in touch with the deacons. They saw my credentials. Somebody recognized one of the signatures, and they said, wonderful, we know you are who you say you are, which the jacklegs, of course, couldn't do. Can you put me in touch, I asked, with the deacons in Providence and in New Hanover? Yes, we will take care of that. And that's where I'm going to stop, and we'll eat lunch, and then I'll continue after lunch. Made contact with the 3 congregations. He got them all to accept his leadership. He took his credentials with him, and at each place that I went to, somebody recognized one of the signatures on the credentials, and they accepted me, and they had to vote to do that. We also organized meetings and efforts to build constitutions for each of the 3 congregations, because now the state no longer ran our churches for us. We had to run them ourselves. And in order to do that, we had to set up rules that people had to follow. Let me tell you a little story before I get into too much detail about rules. There was a rule, even when I was growing up in Norristown, there has been a rule for a long time. You cannot receive communion until you've been confirmed. That's no longer in place now, but when I was growing up, it was still in place. And many of you look to be about my age. So if you grew up during that period and were a Lutheran at that time, you knew you had to go to confirmation instruction, after which you would be confirmed, and then you would be admitted to Holy Communion. That's the way I was raised, and that's the way a lot of you were raised. Well, that's the way it was in my time back in the 18th century. Well, you know how young people can be. One young man decided, when I was on one of my many excursions to one of the other churches, this happened at Augustus Church. I was either in Philadelphia or New Hanover, I don't remember which one, but I wasn't there. This young man was dared by his friends to sneak to the altar and receive communion before he was confirmed. In the pastor's absence, the pastor that was supplying for me wouldn't know him, wouldn't know the difference. And this is what he did. And he did it because he was dared by some friends. Well, you know, when you do something like that, and he was too dumb to know that a lot of people were watching, and the word got back to me. I don't remember his name anymore, but this young man was brought to me by his parents and said, he did wrong. We want you to take care of this. So I said, let me talk to this young man by himself. I began the conversation this way. I said, now you know enough about our religion that you know God is not going to condemn you to live in hell forever and ever because you broke the rule about going to communion. That's not going to happen. Our God is not like that. Our God is not a vengeful God. But you did break the rules of the congregation. And rules are important. Rules are what protect us from chaos. So, something has to be done. We have to do something to set this right. Now, I propose the following. See what you think of this solution. You come and you stand in front of the congregation and you apologize to them, not to me, because it's their rules that you broke. You apologize to the congregation. You kneel down on the floor. I pronounce an absolution. You admit that you were wrong. You apologize. You kneel down on the floor. I pronounce an absolution. You get up. You go back to your seat, and that's the end of the matter. That'll be it. Do you agree to this procedure? He said yes. Okay. The next Sunday he came into church, he knelt down on the floor, he apologized to the congregation for breaking their rules, and he asked to be forgiven. I pronounced the absolution for him. He got up and went to his seat. But I had to say something to the people. I said, now this young man acted like a mature adult. He confessed his sin. I pronounced absolution. Everything now is fine. So I don't want to hear any criticism about him, any stories, any snickering about him. This was the proper way to set this straight. Because I know some of you have broken the rules too. And you have not confessed it. You have not said it right the way this young man did. And I want you to think about that. There was no more trouble about that boy. They left him alone. They didn't continue to criticize him or make fun of him in any way. I did many things that pastors today do. There were always people to baptize, mostly babies. There were always the sick to be visited. There always were the dead that have to be buried and the preaching that had to be proclaimed. But there were also things that I had to do that preachers today do not have to do. And let me give you an example. There were people who had been, I won't say sold into slavery because it wasn't that bad, but they had been indentured servants from the time they were children. And now they had been with English-speaking families, and now they have paid their years of service and are free to work for themselves. And they had forgotten their native tongue. This can happen. They came to me. They also happened to be illiterate. They came to me and they said, "Herr Pastor, teach us our own language again. Teach us to read. Teach us to write." I said, "I will do this." So, it was interesting what happened because there were other people in the community who said, "Look at that. Isn't that pathetic? 18, 19, 20-year-olds going to the preacher with their ABC books and getting him to teach them to read when they should be out in the fields making money for their families." But I did not feel that way. I was proud of them that they could come and ask me for help because they wanted to better themselves. They weren't satisfied with a life of agricultural laboring. They wanted to progress and advance in society, and they understood that education and reading and writing were basics for bettering their position in society. So I taught them. I was proud of them. But even those that could read, they didn't think according to the new environment that they found themselves in. A lot of them operated on principles that they had learned in Europe that did not apply to the new situation. I had to teach them how to think again, differently. Now let me illustrate what I'm talking about. The bells controversy. This was in Philadelphia. One of the honorable council came to me one day and said, you know, there are some crazy people in our church that are talking about bells. They want to have bells in our church the way the English church has bells. There are 5 bells in the English church. They want to have bells here too. And you know there's no room in the budget for bells. We can't afford bells. I said to this man, well, what do you want me to do about it? He said, well, you stand up in the pulpit on Sunday and you say, bells are not in the budget, forget it, there will be no bells, end of discussion. I said, now wait a minute, hold it. You think you're back in Stuttgart, or you think you're back in Karlsruhe. That's what would have happened there. This is not Karlsruhe. This is Philadelphia. People don't think that way here. If you want to do something here, you have to have the facts to back things up. We have to test this idea to see if this is just rumor or if these people are really intensely, for one reason or another, intent on getting bells for our church. We have to test this, and I propose the following. We will have a period of pledging. We'll have a table like this, and the Honorable Council will represent those people that can't write. They come in, you help them get their name down in the book, you write it for them, they make their mark and so on. We will put a book out here, and we will see how much they are willing to contribute over and above what they're already giving to the regular budget to buy bells. You, Frau Schumacher, meanwhile, you will go down to the foundry in Philadelphia and you will find out how much it will cost to cast 3 bells right here in Philadelphia. And you'll bring that information back to the Honorable Council. And you, Herr Schmidt, you will go to a reputable carpenter and you will find out how much it will cost to put the steeple that have to hold the bells and see if our building can stand the weight and how much that would cost to have that all done and bring that information back to the Honorable Council. We'll add up these expenses and we'll put that total at the top of this book that we're going to open up, and the people will write down how much they're going to pledge. 3 days we will sit here and mind this table, and people can come in whenever they want. If at the end of the 3-day pledging period, the amount totals what the cost is, we will proceed with getting bells. If at the end enough has not been pledged, that'll be the end of it. There'll be no more talk of bells. The people will decide this by how much they pledge. We will not decide it. The people will decide. At the end of the pledging period, there was enough money to cover the costs of having bells put not on our church because the church building couldn't stand it, but the schoolhouse could. We put the bells on top of the schoolhouse. Now you ask yourself the following question. Why all this fuss about bells? Do you think it was just a matter of keeping up with the Joneses? The English church has bells, so we have to have bells too? Well, there might have been a little bit of that in it, yes. But there was something much more important than that. It was a matter of self-esteem, because they rang the bells, they tolled the bells whenever anybody died. Let the whole city know that somebody had died in the English-speaking church. And our people are thinking to themselves, they didn't say this to anybody, but this is what they were thinking. We are as good as any English speaker in this city. We do a lot of the work that makes this city what it is. We grow the food that is eaten by the people in this city. We do all the grunt work in this city. We build all the buildings. We are the ones that make the shoes and the clothes. We are worth our weight in gold to these people. And when one of us dies, we deserve to have bells ring in our memory too. So it was a matter of self-esteem. And I wanted my people to have some self-esteem. Not so proud and pompous and whatnot as some people would imagine. But I wanted them to know that they were valuable members of society in that city and in the surrounding suburbs. And if bells helped reaffirm that, okay with me. Get as many bells as you can afford. They got the bells. They rang the bells when any German speaker died, and that was the signal for the funeral to start. We had somebody called a funeral inviter that would spread the news of a death and would lead the procession from wherever the person lived that had died to the church for the funeral. Okay, so that was one example of people taking a responsibility for the decisions that they were making upon themselves. And you have to help people do this, and you do this. You help them by providing the information that they need to know to make an educated decision. They succeeded in doing this with the bells. Now there was another time when it wasn't quite so crucial a thing, and yet our people kept slipping back into the old way of thinking, and this just did not work in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, anywhere. The issue of people going to a different church. I heard some rumors that the Schmidt family were no longer coming to our St. Michael's Church in Philadelphia. They had some kind of argument with me. And I couldn't help it. I stood up for what I felt was right, and they didn't like it, so they left. I'm sure you would have no experience of that in this church whatsoever. I'm sure you always agree all the time about everything that you do. So, one of the councilmen said, you know, the Schmidts are going to the English church now. I said, oh, well, this is the way it goes sometimes. No, that's not right. He said, that's not right. This is the German-speaking church. St. Michael's is the German-speaking church. All German speakers should be coming to this church and not going over to Christ Church there on 2nd Street where they speak English. No, that doesn't go. I said, you know something? You haven't begun to realize yet that you are now in Philadelphia. You're thinking again the way people thought over in Karlsruhe or over in Stuttgart, both cities in southwest Germany. You can't think that way here. There is no government control to back us up when we make decisions like that. We would just look foolish saying something like that. You know what? We have to try something new in this church, and it is this. We have to be nice to people. I know that sounds strange in a Lutheran church, but yes, we have to be nice to people. We have to use diplomacy with people. We have to treat each other courteously and not offend people as if we're bossing everybody around. We can't do that in this country. There is no government to back us up. And if we offend somebody and they go to another church, there is not a thing that we can do about it. Except this. If they leave us, we don't have to bury them in our cemetery. And we don't have to ring the bells when they die. Oh, they like that part. They like that part. But you see what I'm getting at? It's a new way of thinking. A way that had to be taken seriously, or we weren't going to make it in this country. Now, I have one or two things I want to say also of a different nature, and that is what life was like during the Revolutionary War, because that affected everybody equally. I got wind of war, and it frightened me, because I knew a lot of the money that came to support us came through London. And there were English missionary societies that also gave us support. And all that would stop if we went to war with England. But I also lived in the midst of people who felt that they had been mistreated and not treated justly in the matter of taxation. And their feelings were very strong. So I have to be honest with you, at first, I did not care which side won. There are pluses and minuses on both sides of the Revolutionary War. Pluses and minuses. But I did have one overreaching concern. When I decided which side to come down on, it had to be the winning side. Now, how could I tell which side was going to win? This is how I made the decision. My two of my sons became generals in the Revolutionary Army. They had chosen the American side right away. I did not. I was riding the fence. But two things happened that changed my mind. First of all, one day, we heard a loud noise in trap. We had never heard anything like this before. We had no idea what it was. It came from the direction of Philadelphia. A couple of weeks went by. One of my family came up from the city and asked, "Did you hear a loud sound out here a couple of weeks ago?" "Yes, we did." "What was that?" "American guerrillas blew up a British munition ship in the Delaware." And that's what you heard, the explosion. I thought, if they can do that, they just might win this war. And then there was a second thing that finally made me come down on the American side. And that was those young men drilling at Valley Forge. They marched back and forth. It was a mild winter, which is bad for sickness, you know. Marching in the mud, living in the mud. Great weather for flu and all sorts of sickness, pneumonia and what have you. And they dropped in their tracks, but they kept marching. They did not run home to Mama. And I thought to myself, you know what? These men are not going to run away from the lobster bags. They are going to fight to the death. They can win this war with that kind of attitude. And I came down on the side of the Americans. Now, when you are in war, it doesn't matter, in those days at least, whether you're occupied by friend or foe, because the armies lived off the land. That's why many of our people came here in the first place. There were always wars between France and Germany. All their food was being eaten up by occupied soldiers. Now the same thing's going to be happening here. So, one day, Americans were in the area. I had a little girl that I had to bury. And the deacon and I and the funeral director had led this procession to the church, and when we got to the church, we found it had been occupied by American soldiers without any permission from me. I looked inside, and there were several wounded men on the floor, and there were animals there, and there was some fool up in the gallery playing drinking songs on the organ. And when somehow or other I caught his attention, he hollers out to the whole room, "Well, I guess now I have to play a Prussian march song instead of the drinking songs. The pastor's here." And I don't know why, but that comment struck terror in my heart. All of a sudden I realized all these people have guns, and I don't. I could offend any one of these people, and they can blow my head off, and nobody's going to do a thing about it. I also recognized that the guy playing the organ was terribly ignorant of German speakers. To him, all German speakers were alike. He didn't know the difference between a Hessian, which were the mercenary Germans, a Prussian, an Austrian, a Swiss, somebody that came from the Rhineland. He didn't know any of them. He just assumed that we were all Hessians and all British sympathizers. And it shook me up. It so upset me, I started to shake. And I said to the deacon, I'm sorry, I can't function anymore. I've just been reduced to rubble. You're going to have to take this little girl and put her in the ground and say the prayers. I am going home to my wife and hope that she can put some backbone back into me. And that's what I did. You know what? There's something I did forget that I want to tell you. No more revolution. Now I want to go back to when I first got here. And oh man, I'm 300 years old, so give me a break if I'm bouncing from place to place. When I first got here, the way I lived was, I had a room in Philadelphia, I had a room in Trapp, and I had a room in New Hanover with people's houses. I thought, I can't live like this. This is not going to work for me. I have to have a central location where I have an office that I can confer with people and there aren't always children running around my feet that I'm going to trip over and making noise. How am I going to prepare sermons if I don't have a space of my own? I'll have to build a house or buy a house. Yes, I'm thinking to myself, yes, I have to have a house, but if I have a house, I have to have somebody take care of the house. I know what I'll do. I'll hire an old woman to take care of the house. She'll take care of the house and everything will be honky-dory. Oh, wait a minute, Henry. Part of my brain intervened here and said, Henry, remember this. Old women get sick. And then you will not just have 3 congregations to take care of, you'll also have a sick old woman on your hands. Because the people will not appreciate your putting a sick old woman out on the street because she's no longer able to work for you. The people won't stand for that. Do not go down that road. All right, well then I'll get a young woman to take care of the house for me. Young women don't get sick as often as old women do. Oh no, wait a minute, Henry, and my brain kicked in again and said, no, don't go down that road either because these people are all pietists and they will not permit you to live in the same house with a young woman without being married to her. No, that's not going to work. So I shrugged my shoulders and said, I guess I'm going to have to get married. So I put the word out in the 3 congregations that I was open to the idea of marriage. And oh, the dinner invitations came pouring. Oh, Herr Pastor, we have a daughter that would make the perfect preacher's wife. Come Sunday night to dinner. And I went from house to house and I met daughter and daughter and daughter. And finally I said to myself, well, how am I going to choose between all of these wonderful daughters that are being offered to me? They were all talented, they were all beautiful, they were all skilled, they were all pious. And I found myself one night in the home of Conrad Weiser, who was the Indian agent of the governor. And he lived more towards the Reading area. And there was his daughter Anna Maria at the dinner table. And I looked at Anna Maria, and I liked what I saw. I engaged her in conversation, and conversation of the family also. And I thought to myself, I wonder, I am approximately, I'm going to guess, 10 years older than she is. So if I married her, I know who would be the boss in that house. She appears to be meek and mild and devout. I like what I see. Now I'm thinking this all during the course of the evening. So it's finally time to go. I got up, ready to go, and her father accompanied me to the door, and he took me aside and he said, "Hey, Pastor, I have something to tell you." He said, "When my Anna Maria goes to be married, I am sending with her a 1,000-pound dowry." When I heard that, I fell deeply in love with her. And I married her as quickly as I could. And it turned into a love match. I don't know how I would have accomplished what I did without my Anna Maria, who, after 11 children, we all called Mama. 3 of them died, 8 of them survived, which was not bad for the 18th century. She even volunteered to go with me to Georgia to settle a fight between 2 of the pastors there at the Hebron church that I told you about before. It was a classic example of the new young guy coming from Germany finding fault with everything that the old guy had done, and he had made mistakes. But they didn't know how to settle this. She said, "I'm going to go with you to settle that fight," because the Hall of Fathers, not understanding geography in this country, said, "Go down and settle that fight." Well, they didn't realize that that involved a journey on the ocean and seasickness and whatnot. And I told Mama what we had to do, and she said, "I'm going with you." I said, "Oh, Mama, you don't want to go down there. It's a terrible experience, a hellish experience." She said, "Watch my lips. I am going with you. And I'm going with you because I know if I don't, you'll appear slovenly like this I am today. If she were alive, she would never permit me to appear in public like this and not wear a proper peruca instead of a cap for a working man out on a job." So she went along and she saw to it that I got to my appointments and I was properly dressed and that I ate well and that people treated me the way they should. And we did the best we could, and we got that settled. That was the best I could do. At least they were reconciled publicly. I know there were private things that they still disagreed on, but they didn't want another visit from me, so I guess that's why they tried really hard to forgive one another. Now, there's just one last thing Two last things that I want to tell you, and then I will free you from all this torment. First of all, after the Revolutionary War, I'm jumping now 10 or 20 years again, I'm hopscotching around. After the Revolutionary War, in Philadelphia, when the British had left, they vandalized our Zion Church, which was the second Lutheran church that we had built, and for many years was the biggest assembly place in Philadelphia at that time. They chopped up all the pews, the altar, the lectern, anything that was made of wood, and they used the wood for firewood to cook over and warm themselves during the British occupation. Now, they did not do that to the Quaker Meeting House. They did not do that to the English-speaking church. They didn't even do it to the Catholic church that wasn't even supposed to be there. But they didn't mess with them either. We want to know, Pastor, why it was that God let this happen just to our church and none of the other churches. Boy, I had to do some fast thinking when they asked me that question. I said, here's the answer. When there is war, God sets the devil loose to punish everybody for the sin of war. Punish everybody for killing other people that I have made also. The devil is given permission to roam around and cause trouble wherever he wants as punishment for this sin of war. And as the devil is wandering around through the city of Philadelphia, he looks at the English church and he says, I never had any problems with the English-speaking people in this church. I'm not going to bother them at all. I'm going to leave them alone. He saw the Quaker Meeting House. He said, why on earth would I want to cause trouble for the Quakers? They were profiteers in the Revolutionary War. They squeezed every last penny out of the citizens of Philadelphia for whatever goods that they had on hand. Why would I want to stop that? Catholic Church, oh, I've been cutting deals with the Catholic Church for centuries. Why would I want to cause them any trouble? But when he went to the Lutheran Church and he saw Zion Church in action, and he heard the true Word of God being preached from our pulpit, and he saw the Blessed Sacrament being distributed from our altar for the conversion of people and strengthening them in the faith, he couldn't stand it. He said, I have to do something about this. I have to mess these people up. And that's how our church got vandalized. And when the people heard it, they said, we will rebuild. And they did. Now my last piece is this. Also, after the Revolutionary War, we have a new country being established. So there are going to be changes in government, the way the area is governed. And there was a movement to make German a legal language in Pennsylvania, a second legal language. Up to this point it had been only English because it was a British territory, but there were so many German speakers that this movement began. Make German a second legal language in Pennsylvania, and they came to me. I was the unofficial leader of the German population in southeastern Pennsylvania, and said they wanted my support for this movement. I thought about it, and then I said to them, no, I will not support this. When we came to this place, this wonderful place where there's freedom of religion and freedom of class, anybody can move to the top if they work hard. We had to change our way of thinking. We are not Germans anymore. No! Now we are citizens of Pennsylvania in a free country called the United States of America. And it is not our purpose to set up little German ghettos here and there where only German is spoken. We need to learn English, and the quicker we do so, the better, so that we can live together in peace and work together as the community of God made visible in our midst here in Pennsylvania. And I can live next to you, and you being a black man and being a white man, and we can get along. And we don't have to agree on anything, but we can get along. We may not even love one another, but we must respect one another. And I can live next door to you, a Roman Catholic, and we can disagree about everything in religion the way we did in Europe, but we're not allowed to harm one another in this country. We have to at least tolerate one another. And I can live next to you, and you're a devoted Republican, and I am a devoted Democrat. And we can talk politics all we want and disagree all we want, but we dare not harm one another. We must follow the catechism and seek only good for our neighbors. That is what is required of us. And as far as I'm concerned, all of that still applies in 2019. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.